Hello, I've just finished painting this group of plastic unmarried Zulus. They're Warlord Games figures. This is the box that they came in. It's my first proper effort really at painting plastic figures. I've got some limited experience of them, but I'm very sort of old-fashioned, set in my ways, ageing wargamer, and I've always stuck with metal figures in the past. But I decided to have a go at some plastics, mainly because I've been trying to build up a Zulu army for ages and ages, probably over 20 years now. I sort of pick the project up, put it to one side, leave it a couple of years, come back to it. But my Zulu army is slowly building up, but I took stock of what I'd got earlier in the year, and a couple of things that struck me. One was that it was getting amazingly heavy to carry the things around. The metal was really beginning to weigh down, and the other was that I still had a long way to go, and the cost of it was beginning to become almost prohibitive. There was one other issue as well that I began, as I say, a long time ago, and the range that took my eye then was by Redoubt. They're a manufacturer based down in Eastbourne in Sussex, and their figures are very nice. Couple of issues with them though. This is a group of Redoubt figures. I'll show you some close-ups later in this video, but they are quite large for one thing, so they don't fit in very well with other manufacturers. They have quite a lot of variants, but the way they achieve that is that the guys at the back there, I think you can make them out fairly well, they come in two parts. Sorry, excuse me, not the camera. They come in two parts, a sort of legs and upper body, and you have to glue them together. You get 10 figures in the pack, but it means that you can achieve a fair number of different stances from the permutations that you can get out of those 20 individual pieces. But when you get to a certain point, it becomes impossible to find any kind of realistic, this is another group here, realistic poses, and B, you're beginning to repeat what you've got already. And it struck me that with the plastic figures that do come in so many pieces and have so many spare parts to them, it was going to be possible to achieve a lot more postures. So that was the other thing: weight, cost, and the variations of the figures. So overall, I'm quite happy with the result. As I say, I'll give you some close-up pictures in a minute. But I have got a few issues with them. I mean, to tell you how pleased I am with them to begin with, as I say, this was the original box set. I had to renew my subscription to Wargames Illustrated recently, and that came with an incentive. And one of the options was to receive a £25 voucher to spend on any Warlord Games product. So I immediately opted for that and purchased another 2 boxes. They probably all look like the same box set to you. 1, 2 more. So I've got quite sufficient figures to make up an unmarried contingent to my army now. Probably more than I need. But so that's how pleased I am. But just, as I say, I have got a few qualms with them. They are superb figures. On the close-ups you'll see in a minute that one of the things I particularly like about them is all the facial expressions. There's a lot of them that have got open mouths, so they're snarling. There's some even sticking their tongues out. So it gives you the ability to. I really like painting teeth on figures because I think it gives the figures a lot more character, and they look really aggressive and frightening. But I have my doubts about some of these figures. I have tried, as I say, I've got some limited experience with plastics before, and I have tried painting plastics in the past. And I found with those, and I found with these, that they don't seem to paint up in the same way as metal figures. And I think that's because the brush almost has trouble finding the detail on the figure. The detail doesn't seem to me to be quite so raised as it is on metal figures. And to show you what I mean, there's a figure here in the front rank here. Who has, see if I can get that into focus. It's not going to happen apart from far away, but that figure at the front there, on his forehead, he has a sort of spherical bunch. It's actually a bunch of feathers. Now they're clipped feathers, but that sphere is completely flat, featureless. So it's just like painting some kind of pom-pom off of a Napoleonic shaker or something like that. There's absolutely no detail on it at all. And another thing that I'm going to come back to in a minute is the hair on these figures. There's another variant. See if I can find it. Here, one at the back here. The character at the back there, the one at the back there, is one of the few variants where you can actually see the character's head, and it's completely smooth. So I'm assuming that he has a bald head. But as I say, I'm going to come back to this in a moment, but I would really have liked to have seen some heads that had some kind of stippling or something so that you could paint them up to portray them having hair, and there's none of those in this box set. So is that the problem with the plastic, that they haven't got the detail on it, or is it should I have painted it as hair? I chose not to because it's reasonable to assume that some of the figures would have bald heads, but I would have liked to have seen some hair appearing somewhere on these figures, and there isn't any. Now one of the things that's always put me off plastics in the past is that I've heard a lot of people have problems gluing them together. And I have to say, I had absolutely no problems whatsoever attaching arms and weapons and so on to these figures' heads. You have to glue. You get the torso, and you have to glue on both the arms and the head, essentially. And they all attach together really easily, and I had no problem, no issues. And now they are really firmly glued together, so they're actually a much better option than these metal figures here, where I had to glue on the assegai and the shields, and they are constantly coming off with handling, partly because the figures are so heavy that if you grip them in the wrong way, just the weight, the pressure of having to lift them It puts a little bit of pressure onto the shields and so on, and they come off. So in that respect, I'm more than happy. But some people have told me, in fact, quite a lot of people I've heard remarks from have said, particularly with the bolt action figures, that they are an absolute pain to put together. And I suspect that might be partly because they're holding weapons with both hands, and you have to somehow kind of coordinate sticking both the arms together at the same time so that they can manage to hold the weapon. And some of these figures, some of the options you have with these figures, I'll show you what I didn't use on the sprue. You can see there's a single arm holding onto a rifle, but there's another one somewhere, this one here, which has got both. It's obviously firing the weapon, so the arm is attached to the musket, and that might have been a little bit more of a problem to stick on the figure. But one of the things that I don't like to do with Zulus is to give them too many rifles and muskets. I think this one here is an old-fashioned kind of musket. It appears to have some sort of flintlock mechanism. But this other one, I suspect, is meant to be a Martini Henry. Now, as I say, I don't like to give figures too many of those kind of things, because it sort of limits what you can do with the figures afterwards. To my mind, the Zulu armies, they had trade muskets that they got from the Portuguese and so on, but they weren't the sort of principal weapon by any means. And if you go further than that and give them Martini Henrys, which is sort of clearly a reference to them taking weapons off of British dead, then you're limiting your armies to 1879. It's not the case with these particular figures, but that goes even more so for figures that are portrayed, like that guy at the front there, portrayed wearing British redcoats taken off of the British dead. And I tend to kind of steer away from those sort of things, just so that I can use the armies in a lot more contexts. I can use them for earlier wars against the Boers, for instance, or even the kind of internecine wars that took place between the Zulus at times of succession disputes and that kind of thing. So the variations, you can get a lot more variations out of them, but I opted not to go for some of these other figures, other options with the rifles and so on. And that actually caused me another problem, which was that to my mind, if a figure, I'll have to see if I can find one. If you look at this figure here, he has on his arms, his upper arms, cowtails. Okay, so he's decorated himself, and his legs as well have cowtails. Now, you have to stick the arms on separately, but that means, oh look, there's a case at the back there. The guy at the back with the red feathers in his hair. He has on his left arm, carrying the shield, he has some kind of metal band that I've portrayed as sort of copper. No, I beg your pardon. He has two cowtails as well. Got to find one that has. There we go. This guy at the front right here. So the shield arm has cowtails, but the arm throwing the spear has a metal band, which I portrayed as being copper. Now, to my mind, if you've got cowtails on one arm, the figurehead, you should really have them on both arms. I think it looks, yes, it's sort of concealed by the shield, so it doesn't look too odd, but it's not right. I don't think it's right. I may be wrong. Maybe they did have different things on different arms. But if you stick to that rule, without putting rifles on them, giving them muskets or rifles, you can't achieve a perfect balance. You end up with having to fit a metal band together with a cowtail on the other arm. So although there are a large number of permutations possible, you end up not being able to achieve those permutations unless you give them rifles, which I didn't want to do. So that was a slight problem. As I say, I'm really happy with these figures, and I've gone ahead and bought a load more. So I'm not going to gripe too much. Another thing that I had slightly more a problem with is that this is meant to be an unmarried regiment. Now, I'm not claiming to be a great expert on Zulus, but as I say, I have been painting them a long time now, and if you were to ask me how would I recognise an unmarried regiment, I would say two things. One is that they carried black shields, black and white shields. But in a box set that comes unpainted, you can paint the shields any colour you want. So just giving you a shield doesn't necessarily indicate that the regiment is unmarried. And the other main thing is that once a Zulu's married, they then wove into their hair a head ring, which they retained for the rest of their lives. It was literally, the hair was sort of shaved and then wound around with beeswax around this ring, so it became something that you couldn't remove. So the other way of identifying an unmarried regiment is to say that they don't have head rings. But as I said earlier, there isn't a single option on these sprues of a completely naked head showing the hairs. Yes, there are a lot of other options that I haven't used. These guys down here, there are a lot of heads that I haven't used. Another one there. But I would really have liked to have seen a lot more bare heads, so that I could identify the regiment as being unmarried. And in fact, I mean, they look splendid. They look really good with all this regalia on them. But it's unlikely that a regiment would have worn that much regalia into battle. There is debate on that. The reference that I go by, which I think is a particularly good book, is this one here by Ian Knight called The Anatomy of the Zulu Army, from Shaker to Kashwayo. And he discusses this issue in this book. And he basically comes to the conclusion that in Shaker's time, so at the early part of that period, yes, they did wear a lot of their bling into battle, but as the years went by, it wasn't practical, and the feathers and things were prestigious items. They were expensive, and you weren't going to risk losing them or damaging them, so you left them at home. So, to my mind, and as I say, I'm not an expert, but I would have preferred a lot more bare heads and a lot less bling. But having said that, I think they do look quite imposing. So again, I'm not complaining too much, but it's not to my mind accurately portraying an unmarried regiment. Now, what I'm going to do, in fact, is I'm really pleased with the way the plastics have turned out. These are only kind of minor criticisms, so I'm also going to buy some of Warlord's married regiment box sets, and I'm thinking of taking a lot of these heads and placing them on some of the torsos that come from the married regiment box sets. Because I think some of this regalia, you should really only keep it for a few characters in the regiment, the higher ranking ones, to distinguish them from the rank and file, as it were. So they're too ornate, and there's not enough bare heads. Some of the feathers on them, some of the things portrayed on them, I think Warlord have kind of like lost their way a little bit. This base here, there's an awful lot that have the feathers in a kind of upright position. So if you look at the two that I've painted red and with sort of greenish touches in them, there are an awful lot like that. And the painting guide, or not the painting guide, but the little bit of fluff that comes in the box set. There's an example there. Shows those feathers painted white. Now, I think that is wrong as well. What they look like to me is more like the feathers you can see there. They're red with a tinge of green. There are some more of the sort of typical feathers. I'm going to get in focus there on that guy there. But I think that head, it looks more similar to that. This figure here is an illustration of Shaka himself. The feathers are parrot feathers. They're called a louri or louri, spelled L-O-U-R-I-E. They're red and green, and they were extremely prestigious things to wear. You wouldn't find them on too many characters, and I doubt very much you would find them in an unmarried regiment. But Warlord seem to have chosen to, see if I can find another example. There's one somewhere. I think it's on the back of the box. Yeah, on the back of the box there, they've got their sort of painted up figures. They've painted all those kind of heads white or black. There's one there that's been painted black, but they've chosen that spherical bunch of clipped feathers on the forehead. They've painted all of those red, and that is completely wrong. Completely wrong. I don't think they look a little bit kind of clownish to me. And as I say, they were clipped feathers, maybe sort of eagle feathers, parrot feathers, ostrich feathers. I don't know, but certainly not. You wouldn't massacre the really expensive parrot feathers in order to produce a clipped pom-pom like that. So as I say, they've gone a little bit astray with that, and they really should have. Maybe they just wouldn't have sold so many if they had what at face value looks like less interesting poses and features on the figures, but to my mind, it looks much better with them just having naked heads. I can give you an example of the sort of thing I like, but this is a married regiment. These figures are Empress figures. This is a group of married figures, so they all have the head ring in their hair. The one at the back there, you may not be able to see, but he even has a pipe stuck into his head ring. They took snuff, so you would often find a thing for taking snuff tucked into their hair. Empress is a really good range, but as I say, I'm sort of trying to switch now to two more plastic figures simply because it's beginning to weigh me down too much and it's costing me too much money. But Empress are far better researched than the Warlord figures, which brings me on to another issue, which is the box set comes with 32 plastic figures, but it also comes with a metal Induna, a metal kind of commander. And this figure is by Empress, which leads you to sort of question, what is the link between Empress and Warlord? They are clearly collaborating, because to go back to this fluff that comes with the book, there's an advert on the back of it for Empress Miniatures metal figures, describing it as the definitive Anglo-Zulu War metal miniatures range. Now, great, that's brilliant, but the figures are designed and sculpted in a completely different and, to my mind, better way. One clue is that on the shield itself, the horizontal strips of hide that are in rows going in an opposite colour to the background of the shield are actually sunk into the Empress shields, whereas on the Warlord shields they're raised. So they stand out on these shields. You probably can't see because of the poor definition on the camera, but that's one way. If you hold them up against the light and look at them, you can see that they're sunk in, and obviously you notice it when you're painting them. So what is that character doing in the box? That's what I wonder. If you buy it from Empress, it comes in a group of 4, and it's a really interesting little group. I've got all the 4 figures here, so you can see that same figure at the back there. The one next to him is a kind of witch doctor figure, which again, I really like that figure. It's got really weird things like insect cocoons in his hair that rattle, full of character. And there are 2 other figures in the group as well. One is an Induna, which is actually the one they give away with the married regiment. He's the one on the right there. And the other one is an Induna attempting to, he's got a British red coat on and he's trying to shoot a Martini Henry very kind of hesitantly, and he's looking away, anticipating the recoil. So he's my least favourite in that group of 4, but why have them in the box is my question. They don't need him in there. This is supposed to be a regiment. It says a unmarried Zulu regiment on the box. But 32 figures do not a regiment make, even if they're not on a 1-to-1 ratio. To give you another idea, there's a very clear link between these figures and the black powder rules, which is the ones I intend to use when I've got all these finished. They've even got the stats for this regiment in the fluff. But if you buy the black powder supplement for the Anglo-Zulu Wars, this one here, Black Powder Zulu, and you look at the Battle of Rorke's Drift, they recommend having 3 what they call war bands per brigade, and at the historical Battle of Rorke's Drift there were about 4,000 Zulus attacking the British garrison, and that consisted of 4 regiments. So in other words, about 1,000 people in each regiment, give or take, but on average about 1,000. And the supplement suggests that you represent that by having 3 groups of 32 figures per regiment, which means that if you buy these box sets over and over, you're going to have 1 commander for each of those individual components. So you're going to end up, for every regiment, you're going to have 3 commanders. It's overkill, you don't need it. And on top of that, I think I have based this figure individually, but I think they look a little bit lost on the base. I prefer to do something like that with my commanders, and have at least 2 figures on the base, and it makes them stand out a little bit more. So very strange. I think they've got themselves in a bit of a twist there, and I'm not quite sure why it was necessary for Empress and Warlord to put their heads together in that way. I would much rather purchase these commanders separately, or even have a 33rd plastic figure on the sprue, which you could then give a kind of very ornate headdress to, in a similar way to, I believe, I think it's Perry do Wars of the Roses figures, where you can create certain characters out of the sprues if you wanted to, like Richard III or something like that. But overall, I'm quite happy with these. I know I don't sound it, but I am quite happy with these figures, and with any luck, 2016 may be the year where I finally achieve my goal and get a Zulu army on the table and playing with it. So, as I say, I'm going to take a few close-up stills of all these figures to give you a better idea of the detail on them. As I say, the facial expressions in particular look really good to me, to my eye. And I'll attach that to the end of this video. Hope you've enjoyed listening and watching this, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye for now.